Now that we've looked at the evil in us, what about the evil out there in the rest of the world? And a big issue that people often demand an explanation about is war. They might even say, war. What is it good for? Why doesn't God just stop war from happening? Howard Storm recorded his extensive near-death experience in his book, My Descent into Death and the Message of Love Which Brought Me Back. And he describes meeting Jesus, and he had a lot of questions to ask Jesus and the angels. And Howard asked for an explanation of why God allows war, and here is some of the answer that he received.
When I asked about why there had been wars, they were quick and emphatic to tell me, God hates war. God has no desire for you to use violence and destructive means to assert your will over one another. But God allows wars to happen when you are determined to be at war. God has influenced you in the course of your history to find more peaceful methods to resolve your differences. The vast majority of wars that you have desired have not taken place because God subtly influenced people to prevent war. There have been occasions when God has let you suffer the consequences of your desire for war. Every war is a lesson that war is undesirable, and you need to learn better ways of achieving harmony with one another. God suffers every agony people suffer during war. People have tried to hide their base desire for domination and exploitation through collective pride under the banner of nationalism. This primitive tribal instinct has blinded you from seeing the divine within other people. God loves all people as God's children and wants every one of you to see every person as a child of God. Wars happen because of the spiritual sickness in people. We are to care about all people and be willing to help heal the spiritual sickness before it leads to the desire to kill. The way to prevent war is to love aggressively and care for all people.
So they're saying war has always happened because of the human will for war, which is a will for dominating other people and for gaining wealth. And those are the same problematic factors that we talked about in Lesson 1, self-centeredness and greed. Here's Swedenborg's take on the same question, and you'll note some key similarities. It is not because of divine providence that wars happen, because wars are inseparable from murder, plunder, violence, cruelty, and other appalling evils that are diametrically opposed to Christian caring. However, it is absolutely necessary that they be permitted, because since the earliest people, our life's love has become basically a love of controlling others, ultimately everyone, and of gaining possession of the world's wealth, ultimately all of it. These two loves cannot be kept in chains as long as it is the intent of divine providence that we act freely and rationally. There is also the fact that if it were not for this permission, the Lord could not lead us out of our evil. And so we could not be reformed and saved. That is, unless evils were allowed to surface, we would not see them and therefore would not admit to them. So we could not be induced to resist them. That is why evils cannot be suppressed by some exercise of divine providence. Swedenborg compared it to cancer in the body. If it's not detected and acknowledged, it's just going to keep on growing. And it's often a very fragile and delicate process to extract it without hurting the person more. And that applies to individual spiritual development and collective spiritual development. And to see why that's so important, the Lord cannot rescue any of us from our hell unless We see that we are in it and want to be rescued. This cannot happen unless there are instances of permission that are caused by laws of divine providence. This is why there are lesser and greater wars. Wars are just an ultimate expression of the two fundamental evils that Swedenborg describes: love of self, which is a love of controlling others, and love of the world, which is a love of possessing the wealth of others. Love of self and love of the world are perfectly good when they're connected with the higher level loves of loving God and the neighbor. But as they've become separated and misused, as we talked about in chapter 1, they've become this toxic version that is evil. And the human race is broadly infected with these evils at all levels. When it gets really bad, it leads to war. But it shows up in all kinds of places as various forms of conflict or harm or abuse. And we can each look for those things which are the spirit of war in our own hearts and minds, and then resist them. If we do that, we're not adding to this poisonous cloud, and it can gradually get smaller and smaller. But to add complication, since this is Swedenborg after all, there is another spiritual dynamic at play regarding earthly wars. I'm going to read you a quote, and when this quote mentions church, think of Swedenborg's definition as a relationship with God. All wars, regardless of the civil issues involved, portray states of the church and are corresponding images. This was true of all the wars described in the Word, and it is true of all wars today. Everything that happens in this physical world is in response to something that is happening in the spiritual world. And everything spiritual involves the church. Remember, we're talking about our relationship to God fundamentally. We in this physical world are absolutely incapable of seeing what the quality of the earthly church is and which are the particular evils it has given way to. This is because all that show in this world are outward matters that do not constitute the church. We can see them in the spiritual world, though, where the inner realities are visible that the real church is concerned with. All the people there form alliances in keeping with their states. Their conflicts in the spiritual world correspond to our wars. So, the worse people's state is in the afterlife, the more those two evils have a hold there, the more that spills over into our world and creates the conditions for war. But we on earth can resist that by choosing to push back against the negative impulses that come to us from the spiritual world. And remember, the people who are in the spiritual world are us. Just think of everybody who died today or this year being there as themselves. And we bring our mindset with us when we cross over. So the more that we adopt a peaceful and loving mindset as a human race on this planet, the more the supply of people going into the afterlife will have those peaceful characteristics and influence the climate there for the better. It's important to note when we feel like we see unfair outcomes playing out here. Remember that divine providence is able to see things on a time scale that we can't. The reason it seems as though victories come to the prudent side and sometimes not to the just side is that we judge by appearances. We lean toward one side rather than the other, and we justify the side we prefer by rationalizations. Then, too, people do not know that the rightness of a cause is spiritual in heaven and earthly in this world, and that these two levels are united by a connection between things past and things to come, a connection known only to the Lord. So even though outcomes on earth can seem unjust and puzzling in the moment, we can take hopefully some comfort in knowing that divine providence sees the ripple effects of everything far out into the future. As one example, atrocities and injustices that have happened in the past can and often do make us determined to prevent them in the future. God is considering both spiritual and physical outcomes and is working very precisely to make sure that good does triumph in the end. But talking about that kind of time scale often brings up another objection to the way God seems to be running things. Why doesn't God fix the world quickly? Can we hurry up a bit? Just as getting rid of the evil in ourselves is a complex process, getting rid of the evil in the world is a complex process that can only happen gradually. By analogy, this is obviously true in physical problems that we're trying to tackle. For example, in 2021, the United Nations held the Glasgow Climate Change Conference. The conference was billed by its chief organizer as the last best hope to save the planet. So this is run by a group of people who strongly believe that carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions are a threat to us all. So let's fix this right away. I am sure they came out of that conference urging the world to stop polluting today. The agreement outlines specific steps the world should take, from slashing global carbon dioxide emissions nearly in half by 2030, reduced by only half in 9 years. Even with people who are strongly opposed to fossil fuel use, no one is saying the right thing to do is just quit cold turkey. Shut all the gas stations down right now. It would be a disaster. Millions and millions of people would starve and freeze and suffer all kinds of terrible things. If you've got a big, complex world that is entrenched in doing something a certain way, you just can't go too fast. You've got to give time for the system to adjust to avoid dire consequences. It's the same with our spiritual situation. Our minds are intertwined with countless other minds, a whole network that allows us to collectively think and feel and stay alive. We are all way more connected than we realize, and we are collectively hugely entrenched in a way of life that runs, in some part, on evil. Collective spiritual change also has to happen gradually if we're all going to survive it. It's hard to wait for that change. And what can be even worse is when it feels like things are going backwards. But an important thing to keep in mind is that when things appear to be falling apart, that is often an important part of a process that's actually going in a positive direction. Before being reduced to order, it is very common for everything to fall into confusion or seeming chaos. This allows things that cling together poorly to separate. And when they have separated, the Lord arranges them in their place. Nature offers parallels, since in it too, each and everything first falls into some degree of disorder before being put in order. If the skies did not storm, causing unlike elements to scatter, the air would never clear. Destructive forces would amass and wreak havoc. Lately, a lot of people have been talking about how it seems like the world is falling apart. But instead, we could think about what issues are being brought to the surface? What are we getting clear about concerning our priorities and what we care about the most? And what can we do during these hard times to bring a little more love and service into the world? This is a time of sorting things out in our hearts, minds, and actions. Even though it can be beyond our earthly comprehension, nothing bad is ever allowed that doesn't prevent something worse. And nothing is allowed that divine providence won't turn into something good in the end. To recap, God doesn't want war, but can't prevent it at times if people are really pushing for it. Human beings are afflicted by the love of dominating others and the love of possessing the wealth of others. Only God can lead us out of this, and He can only do it if we understand how destructive these tendencies are and want to be led out of them. If evil were never allowed to be expressed, it would spread like an infection and lead to much worse outcomes. God is working to rid the world of evil, but has to do it gradually, because our spirits are complex systems that wouldn't survive an abrupt change. So evil is difficult to get rid of, but as we'll see in the next lesson, God never stops working on the evil removal project.